He was born with just one lung, but carried a heart large enough to bear the burdens of a broken world. From the humble, bustling streets of Buenos Aires to the most sacred seat in Vatican City, his path was never paved with gold, but with grit, faith, and the unshakable call to serve. He turned down luxury, chose simplicity, and walked with the poor, the forgotten, the unseen. He didn't just lead the Catholic Church, he transformed its voice. This is the complete, untold journey of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the man the world came to know as Pope Francis. But this isn't just a biography. This is a story of raw humility, bold courage, and a spiritual revolution that shook the very foundation of power. Stay with us until the end, because this story might just change the way you see faith, leadership, and legacy forever. Chapter 1. The Boy from Buenos Aires. On a warm summer day, December 17, 1936, in the bustling neighborhood of Flores in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a child was born who would one day change the face of the Catholic Church. His name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio. The son of humble Italian immigrants, he grew up in a working-class family where simplicity, resilience, and faith were woven into everyday life. His father worked as a railway accountant, while his mother devoted herself to raising their 5 children. From an early age, young Jorge exhibited a curious mind, drawn equally to science and spirituality. He found comfort and fascination in the world of chemistry, even working briefly in a laboratory. But it was his growing devotion to faith that quietly pulled at his heart. A severe illness in his teenage years led to the surgical removal of part of his right lung, a painful experience that profoundly shaped his worldview. This brush with vulnerability and suffering deepened his empathy for the weak and forgotten, a trait that would come to define his entire spiritual journey. In the noisy streets of Flores, among the scent of home-cooked meals and the echoes of daily struggle, a quiet compassion was taking root in the heart of a future pope. Chapter 2. The Call to Serve. By the age of 21, Jorge Bergoglio could no longer ignore the inner voice that had been growing louder with each passing year. It was a voice calling him not to fame or fortune, but to service, to a higher, more demanding purpose. In 1958, he joined the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits, an order renowned for its deep intellectual tradition and unwavering commitment to justice. The Jesuits are not ordinary clergy. They are spiritual soldiers, educators, and reformers. Bergoglio threw himself into rigorous studies in the humanities, philosophy, and theology, absorbing the depths of Catholic thought while also shaping a perspective that would challenge rigidity with compassion. He wasn't just a student, he became a teacher, instructing young minds in literature and psychology at the Colegio de la Inmaculada. His classrooms were places of inspiration, where ideas met empathy. When he took the Jesuit vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, it was not merely ritual. It was a complete surrender of ego in pursuit of something greater than himself. The vow of poverty kept him close to the poor, the vow of chastity to a life of undivided love for God, and the vow of obedience to the path he was destined to walk. In the silence of Jesuit prayer halls, Jorge found his true voice, a voice that would one day echo across the Vatican. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Dictatorship. The 1970s in Argentina were cloaked in fear. The country had descended into a dark chapter known as the Dirty War, a period from 1976 to 1983, when the military dictatorship unleashed terror on its own people. Tens of thousands were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. It was during this volatile time that Jorge Bergoglio, then a young Jesuit provincial, faced one of the greatest moral tests of his life. As the regime hunted down dissenters, the Church's role became a complex tightrope between silence, survival, and resistance. Bergoglio was accused by some of not speaking out loudly enough, yet others praised him for his quiet heroism, working behind the scenes to shelter priests and save lives. He arranged for safe houses, secured the release of captives, and often walked the fine line between discretion and danger. This era would haunt him and later become a subject of intense debate. But for Bergoglio, the dictatorship etched into his soul the cost of injustice and the peril of power. In those years of oppression, his leadership was tempered not in grand speeches, but in quiet, courageous acts. choices that demanded wisdom beyond his years and compassion deeper than most could comprehend. Chapter 4. A Humble Archbishop. In 1998, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires. But unlike many who rose to such ecclesiastical heights, he refused to wear the trappings of privilege. He turned down the opulent Archbishop's palace and chose instead a modest apartment in the city. He gave up chauffeured limousines and boarded the bus with everyday commuters. He cooked his own meals, washed his own clothes, and walked the streets as a shepherd among his flock. His humility wasn't an act, it was a statement. In a church often criticized for opulence and hierarchy, Bergoglio was a breath of fresh, grounded air. He became a fierce advocate for the poor, the displaced, and the forgotten. In slums and prisons, in soup kitchens and hospitals, he preached the dignity of every human soul. His sermons weren't abstract, they were alive with the struggles of the people. His archbishopric became a mission field, and Buenos Aires knew him not just as a religious leader, but as a man who truly walked the path of Christ. Long before he wore white, Bergoglio wore humility like a mantle, and it was this spirit that quietly began reshaping the soul of the church. Chapter 5. The White Smoke Rises. March 13, 2013. The world waited anxiously as white smoke curled from the Sistine Chapel chimney. Pope Benedict XVI had resigned, an event nearly unprecedented in modern history, and the conclave had chosen a successor. The name was unfamiliar to many, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, but within moments the unfamiliar would become unforgettable. He stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, not as a conqueror, but as a servant. "Buonasera," he said softly to the crowd, a simple good evening that instantly connected him with millions. He was the first Jesuit Pope, the first Pope from the Americas, and the first to choose the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, the peacemaker, the one who rebuilt the church with humility and love. In that moment, the papacy shifted. The tiara was gone. The grandeur was toned down. Humility had taken the stage. As the bells rang out across Vatican City, the world realized they were witnessing not just a new pope, but a new kind of papacy. Pope Francis was not just a name, it was a declaration. The era of clerical comfort was ending. The church would now walk again among the people. Chapter 6. The People's Pope. As the years unfolded, Pope Francis became known not just as a spiritual leader, but as a moral compass in a chaotic world. He was quickly nicknamed the People's Pope, not by decree, but by the way he lived and led. From the very start of his papacy, he launched bold efforts to clean up and reform the Vatican's deeply entrenched financial systems. Transparency, accountability, and a return to ethical stewardship became pillars of his internal revolution. But his vision didn't stop at church walls. Pope Francis took powerful stances on global crises, issues many religious leaders hesitated to touch. He spoke out fiercely about the looming threat of climate change, calling humanity to action in his groundbreaking encyclical Laudato Si, which framed the environment as a moral and spiritual responsibility. He extended compassion and solidarity to migrants and refugees, meeting them face-to-face in camps, washing their feet and listening to their stories. He dared to include the LGBTQ+ community in conversations of dignity and love, opening doors once tightly closed. Francis became a regular presence not just among world leaders and presidents, but also in prisons, slums, and hospitals, places where hope was scarce. His papacy was not about sitting on a throne, it was about walking with the broken. In a polarized world, Pope Francis emerged as a global icon of progressive Catholicism, reminding the church and the world that faith must not only be spoken, but lived. Chapter 7. Scandals and Resistance. But even a people's pope must walk through storms. As Francis pushed for reforms within the Vatican, he encountered stiff resistance from within his own ranks. Traditionalists, career clerics, and factions in the Curia saw his efforts as a threat to centuries-old structures. While he advocated for simplicity and justice, others clung tightly to power and protocol. The greatest test of his moral leadership, however, came in the form of deep-rooted sexual abuse scandals that had long plagued the Catholic Church. From Ireland to Chile, The cries of survivors echoed through sacred halls. Pope Francis responded with apologies, but more importantly, with action. He established commissions to investigate abuse, push for new protocols of accountability, and remove some high-profile clergy from their posts. Yet even these efforts stirred controversy. Some critics claimed he didn't move fast enough or go far enough. Others called him the most transparent pope the church had ever seen. Through it all, Francis remained unshaken in his conviction, balancing mercy with justice, acknowledging past failures while daring to rebuild trust. It was a painful chapter, but also a necessary one. Under Francis, the church was no longer just confessing sin, it was confronting it. Chapter 8, Final Years and Death, 2023 to 2025. As the final years of his life arrived, the vibrant force that had once electrified the papacy began to slow. By 2023, Pope Francis's health had visibly declined. He reduced international travel, often appearing in a wheelchair, and focused his energies on fewer but deeply meaningful engagements. Despite his physical limitations, his voice remained strong. His final Easter blessing in March of 2025 was a moment of profound spiritual clarity. The world listened, knowing perhaps that it would be his last. On April 21, 2025, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis had passed away, the result of a massive stroke and cardiac collapse. The world mourned. From Buenos Aires to Bethlehem, from refugee camps to Vatican balconies, hearts broke for the shepherd who had walked among the sheep. His funeral at St. Peter's Basilica was unlike any in recent memory, attended by millions in person and watched by billions across the globe. Pilgrims, presidents, prisoners, and priests all gathered to pay tribute. The man who had lived with such humility was now remembered with honor, not for the power he held, but for the burdens he bore with love. Chapter 9, Legacy of Francis. In the wake of his death, the question of legacy became not just a discussion, it became a global meditation. What did Pope Francis truly leave behind? His legacy was not carved into marble, but etched into the hearts of millions. He redefined what it meant to be a pope in the 21st century. Not as a ruler, but as a servant. He will be remembered for his unyielding humility, his embrace of the world's outcasts, and his refusal to let the church become a museum of traditions. Francis inspired millions of young people through Global World Youth Day events, where joy met justice and faith came alive in the streets. He elevated interfaith dialogue, forging historic bonds with Muslim leaders, Jewish rabbis, and Eastern Orthodox patriarchs, proving that peace begins with understanding. More than anything, he changed the tone of the Catholic Church. He replaced judgment with mercy, fear with hope, and walls with bridges. For the first time in decades, people who had left the church felt welcomed again. The legacy of Francis is one of transformation, not just of structures, but of souls. Chapter 10, What Comes After? With the throne of St. Peter once again empty, the Catholic Church stands at a profound crossroads. A new conclave is expected to convene by mid-2025, where cardinals from every corner of the world will gather in secrecy, prayer, and debate to choose the next successor. But the choice is more than symbolic. It will determine the future direction of the Church. Will the new Pope continue Francis's spiritual revolution, building on his legacy of mercy and modernization? Or will the Church pivot back toward tradition and conservatism, seeking to restore a more rigid hierarchy? The question echoes not just through the Vatican, but through the hearts of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. One thing is certain, the imprint of Pope Francis cannot be erased. His influence continues to ripple through the corridors of power and the corners of poverty. His spirit still breathes in the prayers of the people. Whatever comes next, the Church will forever bear the mark of the humble man from Buenos Aires, who dared to be different, who dared to love without borders, and who reminded the world that true greatness lies not in authority, but in compassion. Conclusion. In a world growing colder by the day, Pope Francis became a living reminder of warmth, humility, and humanity. He showed us that true holiness isn't found in grand rituals or golden robes, but in quiet service, deep empathy, and fearless love for those most forgotten. His life was not a quest for power, but a call to lift others up. As we reflect on his legacy, one question rises above the rest. What do we truly need from our spiritual leaders today? Is it tradition or transformation, authority or authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your voice. And if this story moved your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're here to bring you stories that don't just inform, but inspire. Stories that reignite faith, history, and truth. Until next time, stay curious, and most of all, stay compassionate.